What's going on, guys? Nick Morton with the PHP Pros. Welcome to episode 3, installment 3. Today we will be going over variables. I will teach you what variables are and how to use them. So the very first thing we can start off with is saying that in PHP, a variable is equal to a reference, an index, a key. Just like in high school algebra when you would say x plus y equals z or a plus b equals c or so on. Those are variables, right? They're shortened value, essentially. You can reference somebody by name. Name would be a variable, and the equivalent would be Nick, right? So they are a reference to a value, essentially. And that's how it works in the computer world. These values are stored in memory, but they are not stored the way you would see them. They are stored in binary, which is base 2, as opposed to base 10, which we as humans are used to. So with that being said, let's get started on variables. So the first one that you're going to see here is something called a string. Now a string is a collection of characters A through Z, 0 through 9, any strange combination. It also includes words, sentences, spaces, tabs, anything that you could think of as an input on a keyboard. A string would encapsulate that. Now, if you think of yourself as having a conversation with another human, anything that you say to the other human would essentially be a string. So, for example, saying, "Hi, my name is Nick," is essentially a string. Now, these next two variables are called integers and floats. An integer is an integer in algebra. And also in elementary math. An integer is not a whole number because it can be positive and negative, but there is no floating decimal point after a integer. So it is not essentially a whole number because it is positive and negative. Whereas the bottom one you see here, y, is a float or a decimal in the computer world, meaning you can have something greater than 0.0 or 0.000, etc. So these are the three basic types that you're going to learn. If you go through the W3's tutorial, which I highly recommend, you're going to learn other data types as well, such as Boolean. That's true and false. Boolean, if you think about it in human terms, is when you go to buy your first beer, right? Are you greater than 21 years old? Yes, no, true or false, same thing. So computers are not as smart or robust as human brains, obviously. They are only as smart as we make them. So the reason that there's a standardized format for variables is because we know that computers will never be able to adapt, at least when they were created 20, 30 years ago. They can never adapt to all the processes and the abstract thoughts that the human brain can process. So the next thing that I want to make sure we go over when it comes to variables relates to printing them out on the screen. It's great for debugging, which means you're trying to find a problem in your code. But it's also great for making sure that your information is exactly where you want it to be. If I've got 10 steps in a procedural script, I want to make sure that at step 9, everything's in order. And something that we can use is either the echo or the print functionality built into PHP. And if you remember the last video, the second installment of this program, at the very end we did something called echo. And what we did was we echoed hello world and then printed out in our web browser. Okay? Now hello world was a string. And now that we're using variables, what we can do with strings that are already stored in memory and set aside, we can reference them later on. So for example, in our previous example, like I said, we can say echo hello world, right? But now that we have a variable named txt or text, we can reference that variable. So we could also do this. We could say echo, I'm going to echo a break tag. And a break tag just creates a line between two phrases. So what I can say now is echo txt. So we'll save that and we'll come over here. And now when we print, I had a typo in my first one, but now that we print, you can see it's identically the same thing essentially. So what I can do now is change this to say programming is fun. And if I save that and run it again, hello world is printing our string that we statically set here. And programming is fun is coming dynamically from this variable called txt. The difference between static and dynamic is it's not as important in PHP as it is in compiled languages, but essentially it means that static variables are ones that are not meant to change during the run of the script, whereas dynamic ones are. And I'll go over dynamic variables as well. Now, something that you're going to see in the tutorial is something called variable scope. Now, that's a little bit advanced. I will touch on it quickly now, just so that I am following along with what you guys may be reading and doing. But keep in mind, if you don't understand it now, that's totally fine. It is a little bit more advanced, I will admit. So let's do something here so I can show you how scope works. And what scope works means, where can I use this variable? All right, so right now we're in a global scope of this index.php script. Scope essentially means where you delimit certain code blocks, if you will. So you could have another file called index2.php, and all the code in there is in a separate scope than the one in index.php because they're two separate files. So I cannot say, hey, index1 or index2, give me a material from each other without referencing them. That's not mean. I don't mean to say that you can never get information from index2, but for right now, without referencing index2, you can only get stuff in your scope. Okay? So what we'll do now is create something called a function, which I'm going to go over later. That is also more advanced. Functions go into procedural and functional programming, where I will also be teaching object-oriented programming. Those are words I would keep going back and reverse and researching. At least get a high-level overview of what those words mean, because I won't be teaching them on extent other than OO programming or object-oriented programming. So what I can do now is create a function. And a function is essentially a code block that I can reuse. Okay. In PHP, it is a procedural language, meaning everything is run down the line. So this variable gets set before this variable gets set. Okay. It doesn't do it all at once, such as other languages that are asynchronous or can do multi-threading. PHP natively cannot do something called multi-threading, which means creating a new process within the script. So I don't want to confuse you guys too much, but just keep in mind that the way you read this as a human, left to right, up and down, well, at least in English, that is how the computer will process it in terms of PHP as well. So if I create a function down here and I say hi, okay? And what this function can do is echo say hi. And we'll comment these out. This is another thing you guys will learn, which is comments, which is great for code. If you ever did take coding programs or classes in school, the teachers are very stern about commenting. I wish I had a better habitual sense for that. I tend to leave comments out and write programs that only make sense to me, so anybody else that tries to write it, they're like, come on, Nick, what are you writing? So comments are a great thing. You can make a one-line comment by typing 2 forward slashes, and you can write anything in here. Another way you can do a comment is to put 1 forward slash with an asterisk, or asterisks. I don't know how to say that word. And then if you put another one and then close it with a forward slash, your comment block is now fixed. So you can write anything inside of these two. Similar to a PHP code bracket, this is a comment section where you can write whatever you want in there, and it's only a comment. It will not be ran by the computer. So back to scope. If I come down here and I say function say hi, and now I run this function, I can say hi. Okay, and we'll save that and run it. Now my computer says say hi. Okay. Now, keeping in mind what I told you about scope, I know it's confusing, just try to stick with me, but Now that you've created a function, it has its own scope within the index.php realm. Okay, so index.php is the overarching script, but these code blocks within it are not necessarily entitled to all of its jurisdiction. So, I can't just say, hey, index, give me things that aren't included in me. So something I can do in here to do that, well, I just want to show you an example real quick of how it wouldn't work. So if I say echo txt, it should say echo programming is fun, which will then show on the page programming is fun. But since it is out of this function's scope, it will not be able to print that out. So if we come back here and run this, we're going to see nothing. Okay. Now there's two ways that we can solve this. All right. And now what we can do is one of two ways by saying global and then the variable name. So global versus local scope is exactly what I'm trying to teach you here. Global scope is the jurisdiction, like I said, of index.php as a whole. Local scope is what this say hi function is limited to. So essentially, say hi has no rights to access anything that index.php has created outside of itself. So now that we want access to the txt variable right here, what we can do using this global keyword is access variables outside of our scope, where our scope is locally within the say hi function. So now as you see, if we run this, it'll be able to print out this variable, and I can change it. Programming is fun test, and it can access it. Okay. So now you guys have the basics of variables, and what I'd really like for you to do until the next video that I send out is play around, right? It's okay to back burner functions for now because I understand that they're difficult. We can play around with them in a later tutorial. That'll be a couple of videos down the road. But go ahead, change these variables up here. Show yourself, this is what, a computer is capable. Echo X, and show it on the screen. Just play around, make X a string. Say, you can even put it like that, put a number inside of a string, echo that out, and it's the same thing. So I really want you guys to get comfortable. You can even take this off, I apologize. But I want you guys to get comfortable with, essentially figuring out the way that you can set up a variable, because like I said, it's very, very similar to elementary algebra, elementary math. It's not complicated stuff, you guys. I know that if you're watching this video, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So don't worry, don't stress, just get used to that, and I'll have a new video for you guys here shortly. I appreciate your time. Keep going, keep grinding, and never stop coding.